You're listening to the Radio Creme Brulee interview series, and here with me to discuss Emma Bunton's life in mono, we have author and pop music writer Quentin Harrison. His work has found its way through a variety of outlets, including an Arts Weekly, blogcritics.com, and his own QH blend. Well, thank you so much for making time for this discussion, in which we are going to take a retrospective look at Life in Mono, the third and final solo album by Emma Bunton. Before we dive into the specifics of that album, it might be a good idea for us to give our listeners and blog readers a sense of why I'm having this discussion with you as opposed to anyone else. So, for the benefit of those listening to this discussion, I was wondering if you could provide us with an introduction to yourself.
Yes, that'll be fine. My name is Quentin Harrison. I am a pop music writer, commentator, historian. I hesitate to use the word critic. I don't particularly care for that word. I've been at this for 10 years now, writing about popular music culture through a variety of outlets. I started off in a weekly arts paper in the city where I'm from, which is Dayton, Ohio. Did that for about 3.5 years. Subsequently, I would go on to form the QH blend, which is how I intersected with you. My own website, which I ran for about 8 years, through both the Blogger and WordPress formats, respectively. That would lead me to receive contract assignments through Soul Music Records and Big Break Records to do reissue album liner notes. And since that time, I've gone on to do several reviews and essays for blog critics who I still freelance for. I've done one project for Pop Critics, and now I am doing these books, the Record Redux books, starting off with the Spice Girls. So basically just a big crazy person who likes to write and talk about music all the time.
That's awesome. Now let's dive right in. Emma Bunton's commercial trajectory as a solo artist is a somewhat unusual one in that her second album, Free Me, actually outsold her debut album. Now, typically when a pop star goes solo after enjoying fame and success as part of a generation-defining pop phenomenon, and in this case that's the Spice Girls, the trajectory more often than not is one of diminishing returns with every subsequent release. Given that trend, Emma Bunton actually did break the mold by being on the upward swing with her second album. But somehow, Life in Mono, despite its artistic merit, did not pave the way for that continued upward trajectory. Why do you think this is the case?
Well, there's a lot of different factors that are at play with Emma and then the Spice Girls in general. I think one of the biggest issues that they faced, which dealt them mixed hands in terms of how they were received critically and commercially, especially at home in Britain, was that they were kind of overexposed at one point. Specifically, I'd say the arc of their career as a group and their first burgeoning solo steps, which is 1996 to 2001, really found them just releasing a lot of material. It wasn't that the material wasn't good. In most cases, the material was very consistent, but it was just so much material. The audience the public never had a chance to miss them. So as a result of that, you had records that may have come out that may have been particularly strong, but just the audience was sort of tired of them. In Emma's instance, situation, I think Life in Mono, how can I say this? Emma had the really great evolutionary arc where she got better with every record. And that's something that you just don't always see with any artist, regardless of the genre, where you look at where she began with A Girl Like Me, to Free Me, to Life in Mono. And with every project that she did, she graduated and she elevated her musicality to a new level. So when she got to Life in Mono, I think she shifted the gears. She kind of internalized some of the 60s mod pop influences and flourishes. They were still present, but they weren't as at the surface as they were on her second album. It was more of a straight ahead linear adult pop contemporary record, which is something she's always worked in that style. But I think by that time, the public had just moved on. Again, like I said, they were probably exhausted from Spice Girls related projects. And she waited probably, I'd say, a year too late. I think had that record come directly on the heels of Free Me in 2005 versus the late fall of 2006 or early winter, then I think it might have had a bigger chance because the public was still very interested. But by the time that record hit, I just think she had lost her momentum. But with that said, that doesn't take away from the record's creative presence, because creatively, I think that record is her best album, and I think that she definitely improved over Free Me, in my opinion.
What would you say are some of the key elements in terms of improvement from Free Me to Life in Mono?
I think that it proved that her interest in 60s pop wasn't just based in Motown or kind of the mid to late 60s pop, or even to a certain degree early 70s. So I think you had elements of acts like The Fifth Dimension in her work, early Carpenters, stuff like A Ticket to Ride, great, really well-structured ballads that had great bridges and choruses, just amazing melodic song structure. So it showed that it wasn't just about the hook, something like maybe with, ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da. It's very hooky, and that's not a bad thing. Whereas something like I Wasn't Looking When I Found Love, the emphasis is on the arrangement, the music itself. So when the track opens, you hear these really beautiful synth swells and this kind of upcharge of melody. And that's the first thing that she hits you with is the music. And then, of course, she comes in with her voice and the lyric, which complements and creates a kind of synergy. So it just seems like she was really working on kind of making a record that could evoke a mood, not just based on hooks. It was based on the actual arrangements themselves, which is what I love about that record. When you put it on, it literally, by the time you get to that mentioned track, I Wasn't Looking When I Found Love, it's, I think, track 6, the record literally, it blossoms like a flower. It just continues to open and just reveal these layers of sound and lyric and vocal that are just beautiful, beautiful recording.
Right. Now, many casual pop music listeners, at least in the US, are blissfully unaware of this album's existence, despite it being released on a major label. Now, if you had to pick specific tracks on Life in Mono to pique the curiosity and to perhaps give listeners a starting point to explore the album, what would those tracks be?
Well, looking at my copy here, again, the mentioned I Wasn't Looking When I Found Love, Take Me to Another Town, which samples the old classic Herb Ritts jazz, the bossa nova jazz composition, Green Peppers, is pretty amazing. Undressing You is pretty strong. And I actually like her cover of Something Tells Me Something's Going to Happen. I think those kind of, and I would also say the title track, which some alternative pop purists kind of sneered at her covering Mono's song. Just to give a quick bit of history, Mono was a alternative trip hop group who did one record in the late 90s, I believe in 97, and their song Life in Mono was notably featured on the Great Expectations soundtrack, which is the movie that had Ethan Hawke and Gwyneth Paltrow. So, but she fits it into the overall thematic and musical arc of the album in the way she does it. So, but that particular track, like I said, I Wasn't Looking When I Found Love, Take Me to Another Town, Undressing You, and Something Tells Me Something's Going to Happen are great examples of her kind of pushing forward with her 60s sound, but in a much more broader way. It's not as evident. I don't want to say it's not as that Free Me was campy, but I think it's a bit more reserved and even more grown up.
Right. Now, for many artists, the singles from their albums serve as a very critical vehicle to generate interest in the album or to give people a teaser or a sample of what they can expect from the album. What do you think about the choice of singles from Life in Mono?
I don't really think we got a chance to see what the record was going to offer. I mean, a lot of Spice Girl fans have many heated debates about why she moved forward with the Petula Clark cover Downtown, which, I mean, I thought was great. And that actually was a very sizable hit. It was top number 3 on the British singles chart. And it was the Children in Need single charity that year. So, you know, she had the visibility, and she had also just come off of Strictly Come Dancing that year. But I think they probably could have shifted to maybe a more mid-tempo. Downtown is not a ballad by any means, but it's not something that is as conventionally up-tempo as, like, say, maybe Undressing You or Take Me to Another Town, which was rumored to be the next single, the third single. All I Need to Know was not a bad choice. I don't think it would have been a good choice for a second single. But again, I don't think it would have mattered what single she picked. I think the commercial indifference would have been the same, because by that point, as a recording artist, she had been in the industry 10 years exactly. And again, like I said, there was just a bit of that Spice fatigue, and I think she just happened to be on the brunt of that at that time, unfortunately.
I think it's a shame that Emma Bunton became a victim of overexposure of all things Spice Girls related. I think she's a fantastic solo artist, and I didn't expect to like her as much as I do. I will admit, though, that her debut album did nothing for me, but her second album, Free Me, made me a fan of her music. And as far as Life in Mono is concerned, I would not be having this discussion with you if I did not like this album as much as I do. In fact, on our station Radio Creme Brulee, we play a bunch of tracks from this album, especially, I guess noteworthy examples include Por Favor, I Wasn't Looking When I Found Love, Mischievous, and there's definitely a few more. Now, do you think there is an appetite among fans for a fourth Emma Bunton solo album?
Oh, I mean, definitely. I don't know in this day and age where she would fit. Because again, another element I didn't add into that is that, by that point, there were other people doing that 60s pop sound, notably Amy Winehouse, who I'm not particularly fond of, but, who really kind of became the face of that vintage pop movement, even though another British actor, duo, Swing Out Sister, has really been the most consistent act to, out of Britain to really work that sound. But I think Emma, critically, and I think with her fan base, both Spice Girl fans and some non-Spice Girl fans, there would be interest there. Would it commercially do anything? No. But again, I don't listen to records based on how well they perform commercially. It's basically about the art. But art informs the commerce in the sense that if the record does well, then that justifies making another one. So I think there's been such a big gap now, I don't know how that would work for her. But I'm not opposed to it. Her duet with her former group mate Melanie C, on the chest cover, I know him so well, on Melanie C's 6th album Stages, I thought was wonderful. Emma still has her voice. So there's interest there. I just think that what direction would she go in now? What would she do? The landscape has changed at least twice, 2 to 3 times over now in the decade she's been gone. So it'll be interesting to see what she would do now. I personally think, looping back around to her first record, which people tend to forget, I think maybe a more general kind of open-ended a pop approach like that will probably net her more listeners, because I think there's only so much that she can do now with the 60s sound. I think she's done what she could do with it between Free Me and Life in Mono. And, there were a lot of elements on A Girl Like Me that could have been explored further. Sonically, different avenues she could have taken. She could have done more kind of R&B light, or some of the contemporary pop. She kind of had a more of a guitar sound that was really, really nice, with stuff like What Took You So Long, which I know this won't be popular to say. That's my favorite single that she ever did. I just think it's a beautifully written song, lyrically, and its arrangement's just wonderful. So I think maybe a record in that kind of sound, something a bit more open-ended in general again, where she could have a few 60s touches, but maybe kind of branching off and returning to acoustic sounds and just some broader pop sounds, and just seeing what works for her would probably be a good way to reintroduce herself.
I personally think a hybrid of a contemporary sound and a 60s sound might actually work great for her if she chooses to go down that path. Now, I see this as a natural segue into my next question, which relates to Emma's future work in the context of the Spice Girls. Now, there was a rather short-lived reunion around 9 or 10 years ago, but it didn't really morph into the type of reunion that another British phenomenon, Take That, had. I mean, the Spice Girls did tour, and there was one single, but there was no follow-up album or anything of that sort. Now, there is talk of another reunion without Victoria Beckham. I suppose the timing of that could not be better, since it coincides with the release of your book about the Spice Girls. Now, what is the type of journey you're hoping to take readers on through this book?
Well, I'm assuming I heard two questions there, so I'm going to go with the first one. In regard to the comparison to Take That, um, they're two different groups in the sense that Take That, similar to what the Spice Girls did, they took a break, after, they split and, Robbie Williams went off and did his thing. And then they made a conscious effort to come back and begin a career as a group, sans Robbie Williams, and found much success and continue to make records and to kind of Take That the next kind of step or legacy. And then of course he would join them later, but they've continued to tour and to kind of keep that legacy going. The Spice Girls began that journey when Jerry Halliwell left, and they did some great stuff between 1999 and 2000. But, as these things go, due to some different personal issues within the band, and, Melanie C was just, to be polite but frank, she was not well at the time. It kind of halted that momentum, so we didn't get to see where the group was going to go, which I think would have been a route of a Take That, where they would go off, do their own things, and come back together. So when they did the reunion back in 2007 and 2008, I think it was, and that actually is partially what stopped the fortunes of Life in Mono. Emma got pregnant, and she had the Spice Girls reunion, and that kind of swallowed up any additional chance to promote that record in the first half of 2007. But I think, that was perfect. They came back, they kind of wrapped it up nicely. Then they did the Olympics in 2012. So with how that segues to the book is that I'm kind of wanting people to step back and take a journey through the entire musical evolution and experience of this group, from Wannabe up through, I think the most recent single thus far has been Melanie C did a composite cover with David Foster and Goon and Vanessa Wu of Earth, Wind & Fire's Let's Groove. So you're going to get this entire expanse of pop music, and to kind of immerse yourself in a canon that is just as strong as ABBA, Madonna, and any of those great pop canons, because when you just look at the sheer quality and the type of experimentation that had gone on as a group and individually, it's just unmatched. And no one has really discussed their music. It's always from the cultural perspective, or how many records they sold, or some of the personal politics and effects that have plagued the group. And no one ever really talks about the music. So that's something that, again, I really want people to kind of take away. Like, wow, Emma Bunton did this great record called Life in Mono, or wow, that third Spice Girls record, there's more to that than, what I assumed, or, Melanie C did this, or, even now you have with Victoria Beckham, you have this supposedly new hip hop record that all of the blogosphere and stuff is talking about. Most of these tracks were available, 9 or 10 years ago through a DVD documentary she did. So there's a lot of misinformation about their music out there. So it's I'm attempting to reset the narrative and kind of get people to really look at their music objectively and then go out and discover it now.
Yeah, this happens a lot. It's not uncommon for many artists in the limelight to have their public persona overshadow their music. Now, I'm aware that this book on the Spice Girls is part of a larger series. I know you're doing something similar for other acts too. So, who are some of the other acts whose catalogs or legacies you're seeking to explore further through these books? If you could also tell us what this series is called, that would be great.
Okay. Well, the series the overall series is titled Record Redux, and Redux is another way of saying kind of to go back and review. There are 12 books in the series, and they'll be done in sets of 3. The lineup is as follows. Record Redux Spice Girls out July 8th. Record Redux Carly Simon, which will be out April 10th next year, and then it will be Donna Summer, Sheena Easton, Janet Jackson, Kim Wilde, Kylie Minogue, Tina Marie, the 70 Supremes, Gloria Estefan, Sister Sledge, and Joan Armatrading. So I'm kind of straddling different, primarily pop and R&B, and then there's some alternative in there and some of the singer-songwriter elements. But basically the overall point of this series is that all of these women have had a specific impact on popular music, but either the conversation that's being had about them is not the conversation that should be happening about their music, or there's no conversation happening at all. So you have an act like Sheena Easton, who was the first British woman to achieve 2 top 10 singles within the top 10 chart at the same time with Morning Train. And Modern Girl, she did a Bond theme. She's worked with everyone from Kenny Rogers to Prince. But because she decided to retire toward the end of the 90s, early 2000s, people aren't discussing her music because there's been no preservation of her legacy. I am attempting to rectify this. Or you have someone like the Spice Girls who have more musicality to them than people realize as both a group and individually. But because they're so kind of obscured by this 90s nostalgia view and people kind of see them and dismiss them, people don't really talk about the music. So my attempt is to kind of rectify that. Or with someone like Carly Simon, who when you think about her, you think, oh, that's my mother's music. But you can see Carly Simon's influence both musically and visually in acts like Taylor Swift or Carly Rae Jepsen or acts like Sheryl Crow or Jewel. So it's kind of contemporizing them and getting people to kind of see, wow, this music is relevant. Their legacy or their artistic thrust is relevant. So it's going to be like a reference guide. So it's going to go through all of their singles, their albums, and kind of give you from point A to point B, everything that you need.
This is a very, very ambitious project, and I'm thrilled that there is someone out there like you that's taking it on. I think the catalogs of some of the artists you mentioned warrant a deeper exploration than the mainstream has given them. And I'm glad you're doing this, and I wish you the best of luck with this endeavor, and especially with this first book on the Spice Girls. But that being said, I personally am very excited about the books on Janet Jackson, Kylie Minogue, and Kim Wilde. I'm pretty sure I just might be the first one to buy those books.
Oh yes, I'm looking forward to doing those. Kim was especially just extremely undervalued. I think she just does not get her due. And again, I think when you think about music commentary, it tends to fall within rock and R&B. And there really is not a lot of pop music commentary that's not attached to pop culture or this kind of flame wars. And I'm not saying that you have a few things like Into the Pop Void. You have your, radio station and website. And there's a few other ones that are kind of holding it down for more articulate, informed pop commentary. But in the overall marketplace, it just doesn't exist. I think people just think that pop music is disposable. And, the only way that we're going to really change people's perspective of this is to really focus on the music. And that's what I was saying, with Emma, if you go all the way back to what she did with Stop, with the Spice Girls, that Motown flicker was there. You listen to her phrasing in that song and the way she handles herself in the first and second verses. And then you go to something like Better Be Careful, which was an album side on A Girl Like Me, which is totally great British Northern Soul, Tamla, Motown, right down to the tambourines. And then you kind of see it coming, and then she just gives you Free Me, and she just completely blows it out the water,
Right.
And then, of course, obviously leading to Life in Mono, which just was the next step and just even greater creative success. And that's what people are going to be talking about these records for years to come, because no matter what people may try to say about her being a Spice Girl, the musicality has always been there. She's always been a great singer. She's a great songwriter. People don't know she writes her own material. And she's also a great interpreter. I don't know if you're aware, the B-sides on Free Me, stuff like Aso Beso and stuff like that, Cricket Sing for Anna Maria, those are songs done by Marcos Val, or Astrid Gilberto, or Paul Anka. Aso Beso in particular is amazing. Her phrasing on that, just her control, is breathtaking. And it's just like no one talks about that. I think that's so sad.
Well, I'm hoping that avenues such as the books and interviews like these would send people on exploratory journeys through these catalogs and revisit what ought to be revisited. Thank you so much for making time for this interview.
Oh no, I appreciate you and your dedication and interest, and I just appreciate it. Very excited. Thank you.